Hello and welcome to this edition of Panorama, bringing you the topical debates in the UK and around the Western world. In this episode, we will be discussing the Muslim Manifesto for Britain. And joining us to discuss this issue, we are joined by Mohsen Abbas, the Director of Arts Versa Consultancy and the Institute for Muslim Community Development. So do tell us what this Muslim Manifesto is about.
Essentially, Muslims who've arrived in Britain have been caught in a cycle of reactionary behaviour on the political front, the social front, the cultural and educational. They've been on the back foot for a very, very long time. The Muslim Manifesto is really the first response, I think, of a real proactive visioning of what the Muslim community really is about, what it's concerned with, and where it's going. This is critical. A vision. All communities need a vision, need a target. You have to have a destination, a goal. I don't believe that the Muslim communities as a whole have spent enough time either researching what their problems and their issues are in this country, and consequently, they also don't have a clarity of vision. They're trapped in this cycle of reacting to allegations, accusations of all sorts of behavior patterns, whether it's around securitization issues, the veil. This reactionary behavior is largely led by an agenda thrown out by the media, perhaps arguably also neocon movements. So
we've just understood that there's a huge problem right now. You're saying that the Muslim community in Britain, for instance, doesn't have a long-term strategy in terms of politics, in terms of where they want to be in society. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely right. That there is this lack of standing back, objectively thinking about why we're here, what we're doing, who the community is around us, what their needs, what their desires are, and actually then saying, you know, what impact have we made on society so far? How are we viewed? What are the institutions that we've developed for understanding our situation? And most importantly, where are we going? What do we want to see 30 years, 50 years down the line? And why is this important? Well, quite obviously. First of all, Muslims now make up 3 million people, members of this population in Britain. They will arguably be 4 million. They are actually arguably 4 million, but actually official statistics say 3 million. This is a doubling of numbers within the last decade. Project that over another 20 years, and at least another doubling, you're talking about 6 to 10 million people, at least 10 million Muslims in Britain out of a population of perhaps 60, 65. This is a huge political issue for people who are thinking, perhaps in this country, to say, what are the opinions, what are the values, what are the social issues surrounding this community? Because whatever they are now, they'll be hugely significant within another 10 years. And I think that there's a process that has kicked in starting to socially engineer and manage these communities, both from within the state itself and by organisations that are perhaps very concerned about Muslims and the way they might be within a European society.
Like neoconservatives, for instance, and other such groups who probably don't want to see Muslims gain a lot of power and influence in Britain and beyond.
Absolutely. And I think that if you look at the media, which is a great indicator of where this thinking is, you see a cycle of visitation of Muslim issues around halal slaughter, around circumcision, around worship, around hijab, niqab, around terrorism, around FGM. I could virtually give you a list of things, honor killings, grooming. These are the things that I've been observing as a journalist, as a concerned member of the community, that the Muslim community is constantly questioned for problems within British society. And we're being increasingly quoted as a problem or termed as a problem. Conversely, if I was to raise the issue with the same people who are bringing these narratives to the fore, if I were to say, okay, Muslims suffer from the greatest poverty in British society, well, that doesn't get covered. And Muslims are 75% below the poverty line compared to their peer groups. Number two, education. Muslims are twice as likely not to have secondary school qualifications at the same grades as their peers. So in education, Muslims are behind. Third point, unemployment. Muslims are twice as likely to be unemployed compared to their peer groups. If I take that to health, again, all the figures say we are at least twice as likely to be as unhealthy or suffering from well-being issues. And so it goes on.
Discrimination,
Islamophobia, portrayal in the media. In every department that I virtually go across, Muslims are lagging behind by twice as much, if not more. Now, for me, that's a concern because firstly, it means that in the mainstream, our narrative as being the bogeyman, as the other, as the dangerous other, the fifth column within British society, that's on the one hand being promoted. On the other side, actually what you see is the Muslim community is dysfunctional in many regards, in terms of identity crises, in terms of psychological issues, in terms of employment, in terms of poverty levels. So here you've got a community which is actually a victim in so many areas. Rather than helping that community to build infrastructures, to build their society, to build responses, to integrate them, what's happening is they're being blamed. Now, in that situation, most of the energy of most Muslims is going towards being angry or being victim, whether it's over the Charlie Hebdo issue, being accused of being anti-freedom of speech, or whether it's to do with subjugating their women with hijab, according to sort of neoliberal narratives. Whether it's either of those issues, the fact is Muslims need a response which is beyond victimized anger, beyond protest, beyond argumentative polemics. We've got to stop being baited and set a clear and long-term strategy, and we've got to communicate what that strategy is, what our values are. What are the values? Muslims believe in generosity. Islam believes in mercy. Islam believes in kindness. Islam believes in generosity. Islam believes in living peacefully with your neighbors. Yet these values get suppressed by these other headlines. And I think this is where Muslims need to come in and say, actually, you know what? We have something to say about the ethics of Britain. We're worried about teenage pregnancies. We're worried about environmental issues. We're worried about white council estate kids which are getting discriminated against. We're worried about inequalities in wage packets across the country. We are human beings. We are living part of this community, creating over £2-3 billion of its financial industry. Our ancestors fought and died for this country. We created this country with our blood, sweat and tears. And I think that message, unless you frame it within a political manifesto, at a time when the general election is about to come, how do you expect mainstream Britain to understand what you as a Muslim living in this country are about? Because most Muslims are also guilty of not engaging with the mainstream community, and the mainstream community is guilty of not mixing with Muslims as well. When you have these two worlds living parallel to each other, not communicating, not understanding each other, it is very vital that we create a space where that communication about what we are is really clear.
So you just said, pretty much in a nutshell, that Muslims have to try and dictate their own narrative of their own beliefs, of their own agenda for the future, instead of having someone else or the government, for instance, impose their own idea or narrative that the Muslims should adopt.
Exactly. Let's talk about a really prickly issue. Jihad, everybody knows what the jihad word is. Even a white van driver in England who reads the Sun newspaper or the Daily Mail will know what jihad is. He has a definition of jihad. And what is it? A man with a beard, a Kalashnikov, a Muslim who goes and kills people.
Kills innocent people.
Kills innocent people. That's what jihad means to an average person who doesn't look into the depth of it. What's the actual definition? According to a Muslim, jihad is striving for the betterment of society. A struggle, an attempt to improve society. Now, look at the two definitions.
Oneself and society as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there you go. Terminology has been hijacked. The word hijab doesn't mean hijab anymore. The word jihad doesn't mean jihad anymore. Now, who's taking that narrative? Neoliberals, neocons, and religio-fascists. So the kind of ISIS-style religio-fascists will take jihad to mean exactly the same meaning that neoliberals want it to mean. Or neo-fascists. the EDL, Britain First, and the apologetics, Muslim sort of defectors or Muslim sort of people who are liberal Muslims or moderate Muslims. I love these words, these terms, but what do they mean? What it means is this kind of painting over of our narrative and a hijacking of our narrative. The Muslim Manifesto is about claiming that narrative and making it really clear to the British public and to the European public what we stand for as Western Muslims. What do we really stand for here?
And it's important, as you mentioned, because just previously you said about how Muslims are being discriminated against, they have a high level of unemployment, also being in poverty, and this will continue and to rise and to get worse. And in fact, what you've been saying in this manifesto is that Muslims could very well become second-class citizens.
Well, second-class citizenship is looming. The latest counter-terrorism laws were actually grounded in laws that were passed several years ago as part of the prevent policy against terrorism. Now Muslims generally didn't really believe that there was violent terrorists and terrorism existing in the community, and it took time for them to sort of maybe come on board with the idea that this was even possible. However, those laws have now been accentuated to the point where actually they literally give the power to the state and to the government and to the police authorities to go and ask toddlers, little 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, about things which might implicate terrorist activity. Now, a society, a Big Brother society, an Orwellian society, in which that 1984 scenario where the state starts to ask little kids about what their parents are doing, or asks them about how do you ask a child whether it's a terrorist or not, when it's 3 or 4 years old or 5 years old? It's bordering on the ridiculous. We've had a rollout by Ofsted, which is now run by a former counter-terrorism officer, Ofsted being the organization that oversees schools. So we've got terrorism officers running school agendas and particularly focusing on Islamic schools. We've got Charities Commission, which is run by people, again, linked to the state in this way, who are analysing those charities. No problem, but that is discrimination. If it's not done across the board, it's the beginnings of singling out Muslims in a backdoor way. And the prevent policy and the counterterrorism laws are flawed on a fundamental level. They talk about extremism, not violent extremism. So when you have this loose definition of what extremism is, because nobody's given me a clear definition of what it is, even from the governmental side, it's so broad, so loose, it could mean somebody who's an environmentalist activist in this country who wants to protest against the environment, or somebody who's an animal rights campaigner, or somebody who simply wants to protest against corruption in government. All of them could actually be graded as extremists simply because they don't hold the view which so-called Middle England has. So does that mean that radicalism or having beliefs of your own are now no longer possible? Is it outlawed in Britain? And are you subject to having your emails hacked? Will you be watched by GCHQ? This is really serious. I've got no objection to jihadists coming from ISIS, coming back here being analysed, but the laws we had in place were enough to deal with those people. Why you've managed to spread the net to the entire community, and particularly the Muslim community, is dangerous.
Okay, well, that is the end of part one. Join us again for part two of the show.
The crisis of capitalism, the European impasse, the energy shortages, the emerging power of Asia, the economic power of the Arab world, the economic debate, informative, revealing, and progressive. It discusses the economic event of the world.
Economic debate, where the numbers reveal the truth.
Hello and welcome back to the second part of Panorama. We are discussing the Muslim Manifesto for Britain with our guest Said Mohsen Abbas. Now, we were just talking about the importance of having a manifesto, or the importance of Muslims having a strategy for the next few decades. simply because of the situation they are in, and tell us more about the situation they are in. Could you say it's a very dangerous situation?
Absolutely. I think there's a state of emergency that Muslims should declare within their community development programs. Because on the one hand, you've got a huge amount of money coming from various state players, and one could argue all sorts of players, but they are there. Even our own government, by investing in Prevent, is looking at management of the Muslim community, whether you like to put it that way or not. That could be an accusation of social engineering. It could be just social management. It could be part of just government planning. Term it the way you like. Government is interested in what kind of Islam exists here and what kind of Islam you practice. That's effectively what the Prevent laws have initiated. But the problem is they've dealt with only symptoms. This is the fundamental flaw in the sincerity of those programs. When you look at only the symptoms of a problem and you don't look at the root causes, and also you don't look at the solutions, it makes me suspicious.
So give us an example, one example.
Let's say terrorism. You know, if I was going to deal with the issue of terrorism, I would first of all want to know what's behind it. So there'd be a huge research that I would do within the community, or get the community to do research about why this is happening. Look at the holistic research based on social, political, cultural, economic factors that might be producing these young people. And then you'd look for solutions, right? Now, what we tend to be doing is looking at just the symptoms and shouting about the fact that we've got terrorists, these terrorists exist, right? But actually the solutions, robust solutions, are not in place. After 15 years or 14 years since 9/11, I don't see the emergence of a real structured community development plan. I don't see intervention within the school mechanism, whether it's state schools or otherwise, to look at what the fundamental causes of this. And I'll give you a simple answer. In my research, and I haven't had a huge load of money to do this, but when I look at Western society, or I look at the secular education system, there are 3 or 4 fundamental flaws which also create robotic thinking, binary thinkers. And that's whether they're Muslim or otherwise. Lack of logic. Teaching of logic, lack of teaching of reasoning skills, lack of promotion of imagination amongst kids, lack of philosophy or the if question. These issues are fundamental, because what they are the toolkit for getting children to ask questions. Now, if in the schools we're not teaching them, i.e. secular state schools, and then on top of that, we're allowing funding from abroad, particularly Saudi Arabia and a lot of the Arab countries where the Arabization of Asian Muslims particularly has been taking place. That Arabization is of a very dry and very literal interpretation of Islam, imported to Britain, a pluralistic society, imposed through mosques, madrasas and the parents on little communities which are ghettoized, Blackburn, Preston, insular Muslim communities, lacking education and all those issues I mentioned earlier. What's going to happen? You've got this dry, literal, very binary kind of interpretation of Islam, which you've allowed into the country through the petrodollars. And then on top of that, you complain that these kids are then coming up with non-thinking skills. They don't ask questions. Critical inquiry exists. So you're not teaching it in the schools. You're not teaching critical inquiry within those madrasas. The parents tell them to shut up when they ask questions. What do you expect those children to be when they come out? Consumerists of one form or another, definitely. And certainly limited in terms of their ability to deconstruct ideas, whether that's radical extremist ideas or mainstream consumerism. They're not going to be able to understand the difference between how they're being controlled by these kind of nefarious agendas, as far as I see. So there's a fundamental failure in education. Now, I'll move on from the government's lack of responsibility in finding solutions to our own community leadership. That's another area.
And in fact, it's a very important area, because that's where a lot of Muslims, they do go to the mosque. They do have leaders in this community, and of course, you've approached them. You've tried to get them to understand this particular game, to understand these problems, and to try and fix and find a solution. Have you had good feedback from these mosque leaders?
Cautious feedback. They run religious economies. Madrasas and mosques fundamentally are religious economic power bases. They've evolved. There are thousands of them across the country now. But the people that run these centers usually are people who are heads of tribes, localized tribes. And they don't have a meritocracy mechanism. So therefore, the intellectuals and the technocrats and the experts, the political scientists, the social scientists, the anthropologists, the cultural experts, even the ulama, they're not really allowed to breathe properly to create solutions which are relevant to the 21st century. What they've done is establish the hardware, i.e. the mosque, the building. But what they fail to do is understand that in the 21st century, you need software which is compatible with the mindset of the young people today. That software is not being generated by this leadership because they don't have that vision, by and large. Some of them, yes, I'm talking broadly, that they are proud of their centers, they're proud of their bases that they build, but they use them for what? Rituals, general assemblies of religious teaching, traditional, and what is the content? The content is directly imported from the cultures of Pakistan, Iraq, and wherever these immigrant communities arrived from. Those messages, first of all, are not packaged in a way which delivers properly to a soundbite generation. Attention spans of young people in this day and age, based on social media, based on their sort of watching of Hollywood and Bollywood, means that actually you're up against a new kind of storytelling. And the storytelling which our elders are adopting is archaic compared to the modern need. So they're failing to actually deliver the message of ethics, of love, of generosity, of the values of Islam. They're boring the hell out of these kids. Most of them don't go to the centers anymore if they can help it. They'll turn up out of religious obligation. And there are a few sort of fundamental stories like Imam Hussein alayhi salam, which are so powerful, which still pull some of the kids together. You're getting that generation being completely not communicated to. This is a fundamental failure. A second criticism is that over £1 billion of charity is raised by Muslim charities in this country. 95% of it leaves the country. They're not dedicating it to community development infrastructure of their youth in this country. They're sending it abroad. And that is a major mistake, because the community here needs leadership and it needs direction. And the youth here needs leadership training, they need programs for social development, they need psychological therapy, understanding about their identity crises. None of these institutions are really in place in a quality way. It's that quality that needs to be engaged through the intellectuals, through the academics, and through the forward-thinking ulama. They are not being empowered. They don't have the resources, and that's what we need to be doing.
I mean, the Muslim Manifesto itself is hoping to highlight this and to try and create a solution around these particular problems. So what is the next step now that we've had the Muslim Manifesto? What are you hoping to do? What are the solutions, if you like, to remove these problems, or to try and get rid of them, and to start something new for the Muslim community here in Britain?
Well, firstly, you have to have the ability to research. You need research institutes of a high quality that, first of all, think tanks, analysis centers, experts that look at your problem. Then you need those researchers and those analysts to also go and look at best practice, what works in this society. Then you need to finance all these processes to be able to come up with the models, the new models and the institutions, and to improve those institutions with software, as I put it, i.e. syllabuses that work, communication methods that work, internet websites that work for the kids, and you need to start building those. So those are just some of the solutions. First of all, you need to do your homework. You need statistics and facts and research about what the issues and the problems are. Then you need the research about how to solve those problems. And then you need to build the models and the institutions that solve those. The problem is that in between, let's take on the political models. Let's say if I wanted engaged Muslims in politics in this country, Muslims will quickly jump at me and say, but we've got 500 Muslim councillors in Britain. We've got 10 or 12 or 8 or 9, whatever MPs. What are you talking about? We have engagement, we have Muslims. But my answer is, actually, what you've got is a load of rubbish. because most of those MPs don't have the intellectual ability. They're not representing your Muslim community, nor are they necessarily meant to be. What's happening is because you don't have councillors who understand the issues, who aren't interested in the issues, and aren't elected on a meritocracy basis, but more on a tribal basis in your local communities, what you've got is guys who are inadequate and don't understand the nuances of what our social development should be and our political development, so therefore they're not addressing the problems. And what they're doing is filling and occupying a space for the Labour Party, for the Liberal Democrats, and actually they're doing a great service for the mainstream, because through them, the community doesn't get the finances it requires to fix the problems. So that leadership, not asking for social deprivation to be dealt with, or not having a plan about political engagement in the community, is actually creating a problem. What they're doing is they're acting as a stopper from real activists, real development experts, real academics, real intellectuals, from actually getting the money from government to apply the solutions and those models that we were talking about. Because even government has a vested interest in building these social, political and cultural structures. But neither the government is being allowed to do that, partly because arguably they don't want to or don't want to spend more money, and also our politicians are fundamentally failing. So there is a real subtle undermining of the whole community's progress because we're not engaged by the right people, by the intelligent people, with people with the real ideas. We are empowering tribalism and tribal leadership, and that in turn is costing us in terms of our engagement. And the manifesto, what it does fundamentally is it goes and occupies the space in the House of Lords, in Parliament, saying this is a space for the thinkers, for the out-of-the-box thinkers, for the people with solutions, to come and say, you too have a right to engage with government to tell them what our problems are and what our solutions potentially are.
So the Muslim Manifesto in a nutshell is to try and get the Muslim community to be proactive.
We're bringing about a revolution. It's a revolution in the way we do things. It's a revolution in the way we think. Because unless, as a leader, you know where you're going, you have a manifesto. You tell the people, this is why I am your leader, because I have a direction, I have a purpose, and that purpose is equality, justice, freedom, liberty, and other issues. I am going to fight for these things for you. Our leaders at the moment, sadly, don't do that. There is no agenda and there's no vision of where they're going. This manifesto will clarify what that vision is.
Mohsen Abbas, thank you for coming on today and to talk about the Muslim Manifesto, and I hope it will be a success.
Thank you very much.
And that is all we have time for today. Join us next week for more of Panorama. Goodbye.